August. Joining me today is America's #1 credit expert, John Ulzheimer, formerly of FICO and Equifax. All right, so we were off last week. I don't remember exactly why. I think we had something going on, but we are back. Glad to be back. And John, we got a few things we're going to talk about. Um, Let me do this real quick. Let me bring up my. I forgot to in all of the pre-live conversation that you and I had. I forgot to bring up a piece of my software that, there we go. Okay. Excellent. All right. So I got that up just so people can post their comments and we can put them up on the screen. So for those watching, as we go through and John and I talk about the subjects we're going to discuss today, if you got any questions about anything, that's what we're here for. Feel free to post and we will make this Q&A all about you. So I can see we're getting a handful of people jumping on now. That's really good. So, John, I know we in the email earlier today, I brought up a subject, one that you said you wanted to approach with some I don't know, delicacy would be is delicacy really the word? I don't think that's really the word I'm looking for. Maybe on a broad level. So the subject we're going to talk about, I'll just bring up this article, is did Equifax botch your credit score? And that initially came out some time ago, and then the Wall Street Journal got a hold of it. Then it became a totally different thing. And I read the article. I actually read a couple articles on the subject. It didn't really seem like that big of a deal for me. I mean, my thought was, okay, so if they're talking about a 25 point either way, that's pretty much normal score migration to begin with. That's going to be really, really tough to kind of parse out any damages from that. But I'll let you weigh in and give me your thoughts on this 3 week period.
Yeah. Initially, a mortgage publication wrote a story about this back in, I believe, May, and no one cared. It was someone sent me the article and we talked about it, and I thought, wow, this is going to be a big story. Where's all the coverage? What I call copycat coverage or secondary coverage.
Yeah.
I guess that's kind of the same thing. And it didn't happen, and I was actually kind of surprised. I was like, well, all right, I guess no one cares. And then I just moved on with my life. And then the Wall Street Journal, or journalist named Anna Maria Andriotis, who I've been interviewing, she's been interviewing me for a decade plus, maybe, I don't know, even prior to her time at Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
And so she wrote a story about this Equifax programming issue. And I can always tell when Anna Maria writes a story about credit because my phone blows up, my email blows up, and then all these other media outlets who are writing what the copycat or the secondary stories want to talk about it. And I even texted her. I said, "You must have just published something because my phone's blowing up." And then I found her story about
Right.
it. So let's talk about. So it's actually kind of interesting. You said that you read some articles about it. So did I. And I'm kind of curious what your initial reaction was to the quality of the coverage of the issue.
When I read it initially, I thought, well, oh, and by the way, Jeffrey, I do see your posts. We'll get to those in just a second. Just John and I are going to finish up with this subject before we roll into those. So my thought was maybe similar to what yours was. I was really surprised that it didn't get a lot more attention because my first thought is, okay, somebody's going to get really, really jumpy and very excitable about anything that has to do with Equifax, especially since that data breach that we had not
That's
too
right.
long ago.
Yeah.
So I'm like, this is going to be, this is going to be like a dog pile on Equifax any minute now. And I was really surprised that it didn't happen. But when I read through the article, I'm like, well, okay, so yeah, maybe 25 points either way. I'm referencing the article that I just popped up that you were quoted in. And I thought, yeah, are people actually approaching this rationally and intelligently and realizing that it's a 25-point differential. Can that make a difference in some kind of loan approval? Yeah, sure. But I mean, our scores float that much up or down for the most part anyway. So,
That's
I mean, I really thought that I was, like I said, I was really surprised that it didn't get a lot more traction. But I'm not at all surprised now that it kind of blew up into the thing it's blown up into.
Yeah, so I had a couple of number one, I thought I thought and still think that the coverage of the issue is really bad. Normally, when people write about Equifax, they're writing about errors on credit reports or data
Yeah.
breach issues. This was a curveball. This has nothing to do with errors on credit reports. This has absolutely nothing to do about data breaches. The CBS Morning News reached out to me, and they were going to do a segment on it, and they insisted on calling it a data breach, and I was like, please, 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 do not call it a data breach.
Yeah.
People are already distrustful of the media. You're knowingly reporting something that's wrong, and I'm telling you. And thankfully they listened to me and they didn't call it a data breach. So this had nothing to do with the data breach. No one's credit reports had errors on it.
Right.
None of that stuff happened. So the usual issues that people like to pile on credit bureaus about, especially Equifax, were not at issue here.
Right.
Essentially what happened, and I agree with you, it's become a mountain when it really was a molehill. And I can say
Sure.
that. Equifax can't say that. Equifax's president can't say that.
Yeah.
They've got to address this as it's, the biggest thing ever and super duper important. But I can be honest about it. I'm not beholden to anybody. It has absolutely become a mountain, but it truly is a molehill.
Yeah.
Except for, maybe a few really oddball scenarios that no one's been able to identify yet because it's next to impossible.
Yeah.
So essentially what happened in some sort of a conversion to their cloud-based database, one of the components of credit scoring models are called stag variables, right? Standard aggregate variables. And a stag variable is, without getting all egghead on everybody, which is going to it's going to go from our viewers from whatever it is now down to zero,
Right.
which I don't want to do, is essentially when a credit report is scored, I think we don't really get super specific as to how that process occurs. I think we all know, and we always talk about how, there's a scoring model, and the scoring model is usually one built by FICO or VantageScore or some other boutique model developer. And then, you take a credit report and you marry it with the scoring model, and it yields a score, and it's 3 digits between 300 and 850, and the higher the better, blah, blah, blah. And that's kind of how we leave it, right? We don't really, the people watching us right now don't care about the nuts and bolts, or what I call the cornflakes. They don't care about getting down into the cornflakes of how it actually happens. They just want to know, A, is my credit report safe? Is the data accurate? Is my score good? And if it's not good, what can I do to improve my score so I can borrow money at really competitive terms? That's generally what people care about when they talk about credit. And so we've never really talked about, mechanically, how does all this stuff actually work? And in order to truly understand this latest Equifax issue, you kind of do have to get into the egghead side of stag variables and how those are calculated and what that stuff actually means. But let's just to the extent that I can just get people to trust what I'm about to say, right? Essentially what happened is the calculation of those standard aggregate variables in the conversion to Equifax's cloud-based system somehow got messed up. And so some of the attributes that are scored, or the aggregated variables that are scored, were wrong. And so because of that, to the extent that was one of the metrics that was being scored in the particular scorecard that the consumer's credit report was going through at the time that they made an application back in March or April, there's a possibility that their score would have been calculated incorrectly. Now, a lot of people think that calculated incorrectly equals lower score, or that calculated incorrectly is a synonym for lower score.
Right.
That's not the case. And it'll be really interesting for the people who are complaining about this, who want to become a member of the class, because of course a class action lawsuit has already been filed. You know how
Of course.
it didn't
Yep.
take more than a couple of days before that they found some person in Florida who swears that her score was lower by 130 points back in March when she applied for an auto loan, and it was because of this issue. Well, good luck with that. We'll see.
Yeah, and I can see it now for you, John. If you get called up to bat to be an expert witness on this, this is going to be a fun ride for you.
No, this is literally my wheelhouse. I mean, there's really not much better in my wheelhouse than what we have here. And the good thing is that anytime someone's score is different or changes on a credit report, there is a scientific explanation for that change. It's never, oh my gosh, no one can figure out why the score is different. There's always 100% of the time an explanation. And so it's actually, it may take some work, but it is absolutely something that can be determined as to what was your score at this time? Was it calculated correctly? If it was not calculated correctly, what about it was calculated incorrectly? And what should your score have been had it been calculated correctly? So all those things have an answer, and it just takes someone who understands how to find that stuff as to come to the answer. So that's essentially what happened. And this happened between a 3-week period, that the last 2 weeks of March and the first week of April, according to Equifax. It affected about 300,000 people, to the good and to the bad. It wasn't all to the bad, obviously. And according to Equifax, it was somewhere around 20 to 25 points for the consumer scores that did change. And you're right. You talked about score migration earlier. If everything was happening organically and correctly, your scores kind of cruise within a 25 plus or minus score band anyways, just because your balances go up and down, things are deleted, things get added, things get older, balances on accounts move. So the challenge is really going to be is, well, if the score was different, was it different because of score migration? Was it because you maxed out your credit card? Was it because something was delinquent? Did you pay off a balance? Did you have an inquiry? Or was it because of this issue with respect to Equifax? And so again, those all have an answer. There's an answer to every single one of those questions. It's just a matter of finding it.
Whoever the plaintiff's attorney is going to use for their expert, oh my God, they're going to have a hard time with this one. Because how on earth?
It's going to. That's a very good question, because there's not that many people that do what I do. Okay, I operate in a very small universe of people who call themselves credit experts and who are willing to put themselves kind of in harm's way with respect to lawsuits and cross-examination and Daubert motions and judges and juries. There's only about 5 or 6 of us that are willing to do that. I'm the only one that does it primarily for the defendant's side. The other ones do it primarily for the plaintiff's side. So there's certainly more people to pick from for the plaintiff's side. But the question is does anyone really know what a stag variable is? And does anyone really know how to calculate them? And then that's a very good question. Well, I guess we'll see.
No, because you know all these guys. I know most of these guys. And if I got that phone call, I'm like, hey, listen, guys, I'm not. There's no way I'm going to be able to answer this for you, because it's one of those impossible tasks, I think, in my opinion. All right, before we move on, Jeffrey's got a question. It actually is a real good one. There are 2 types of credit. So we got to do a little bringing Jeffrey up to speed with how this stuff works. One being FICO. Does your software help with both? We can almost remove that last sentence right there. And John, the common misunderstanding, and Jeff, this is not a dig at you or anybody who's watching, the common misunderstanding that takes place where people believe that the credit and scores are somehow the exact same thing. So John, maybe you can kind of break this question up. And
this is why we're here, right? This is a perfect, I love this question, Jeffrey.
Yeah.
Don't stop asking questions, please. The reason David and Credit Versio, the reason we do these things is because we love these types of questions. So There are, so let me just, I don't know if you want to throw that question back up there, David, just so people can see it
Yeah.
as I dissect it.
Yeah.
So I think what Jeffrey's saying, and certainly Jeffrey can clarify this if I misparaphrase him, but there are, as far as there are two types of credit, there are actually many types of credit, and generally it's revolving installment, um, and open. Open meaning that you have to pay in full every single month. And so, as far if you meant there are multiple types of credit, installment, which is fixed payment for a fixed period of time, revolving, which is like a credit card, you can pay a little bit, get your credit limit back, pay a little bit, get your credit limit back, and then open. Open is like the American Express green card or your utility accounts where you have to pay it in full every single month. If you meant there are two types of credit scores, because you referenced FICO in the second sentence, there are two brands of credit scoring models that are commonly used in the US credit market. There are the FICO branded credit scores, and there are dozens and dozens of them, but we kind of collectively refer to them all as FICO scores, but there are tons of them. They're not just one. And then there are the VantageScore branded scores, and there are four of those. 3 and 4 are the VantageScore 3 and 4 are the two commonly used generations of their scoring system. So that's right. So I think I inferred what you're asking correctly. So there are the FICO branded scores and there are the VantageScore branded scores. They do the same thing, meaning that they're designed to predict the likelihood of somebody going 90 days delinquent or worse in the subsequent 24 months after the score is calculated, and they're used by lenders to determine whether or not they want to do business with you. As far as the volume, a lot of people like to poo-poo VantageScore because they're not used by mortgage lenders. A company called Oliver Wyman just released a market adoption study, and the volume is impressive. I think it was either 13 or 14 billion of their scores were used between 20 and 21, between a 12-month period between mid 2020 and mid 2021. That was 14 billion with the letter B, not the letter M.
Right.
So let's stop referring to VantageScore as a joke, because they're a legitimate player.
The bulk of that, John, banks, specifically credit cards.
That's right. And a lot of lenders actually use both scores, meaning that they'll collect a VantageScore and they'll collect a FICO score at acquisition or for account management. And they'll either use a blended score strategy, which is pretty common, like a two-dimensional grid based on FICO and VantageScore, or they will just use one for testing and validation and benchmarking. So certainly, even though just because you go to a mortgage lender and they're pulling some generation of a FICO score, please don't think that the VantageScore is not an important score, because it absolutely is.
Well, also too, I think Jeffrey, maybe this might have been the question you were asking too, is just to expand on that a little bit. So you have your credit report. This is the data. This is all the information that's being reported by the data furnishers, collection companies, your bank, your mortgage company, auto loan. All of that is collectively your credit report. And you don't have a separate credit report for FICO and a separate credit report for VantageScore. That's not the way that it works. It's a collection of the data from which VantageScore will create your score and FICO will create your score. But it's all predicated on the same pool of data. So I think so John, when I get this question asked sometimes, like, well, if I'm doing repair or I'm doing some disputing, is it going to affect my FICO score or just my Vantage score? Well, the answer is both. It'll be different from one score to the other because they use different algorithms to determine your score. But they're both getting the data from essentially the same source, which is your pool of information held with the 3 credit reporting agencies. Anything you want to add to that, John? Or
if you think about it, let's think about it kind of as a pyramid. So you have 3 credit reports, right? One from Equifax, one from Experian, one from Transunion. And below that, you have just this army of credit scoring systems that are used. And we haven't even talked about the ones that are used by insurance companies. We haven't even talked about the variants, the bank card variants, the auto variants of FICO's credit scores. We haven't even talked about any of that stuff. So this stuff literally, it snowballs, and that's why it's important that you understand that you don't have a score, right? You have tons of scores, and a lot of them you'll never even see, right? When's the last time you saw your insurance credit score? Because it's not the same one that the lender uses. Those are the attract scores that are owned by Lex Nexus that are part of the Clue credit report. So, it's actually not a credit report; it's an insurance claim report, but it's a consumer report.
Yeah. Now we're going down that credit rabbit hole.
Yeah, it is. It's almost like there was a fantastic Super Bowl ad about 10 or 15 years ago by EDS, and it was about it was like a bunch of guys on horses trying to herd cats.
I remember that.
And the cats were tearing up their faces, and they had like those little things that they were trying to get the fur off their chaps, and it's talking about how it's impossible to herd cats. And I always tell people that if you're trying to manage all of these credit scores, it's a little bit like herding cats. It's impossible. What you really should be doing is managing your 3 credit reports, because all of those scores are entirely dependent on the information in those credit reports, including the insurance scores. So to the extent that you've got really good credit reports, then you really don't need to worry about whether it's FICO Gen 2 Auto or FICO Gen 5 Bank Card or FICO Gen 9 or FICO 10T or VantageScore 3. You don't really need to worry about that kind of stuff, because they're all going to be good. They're not going to be identical, but they're all going to say the same thing about you, which is that you're a really good credit risk.
Yeah. I've told that to so many people over the years, John, in credit consultations, like, hey, just do your best to pay your bills on time, practice great credit habits, and your scores are going to be whatever they're going to be. You really can't. You don't have a tremendous amount of direct control over the score. It's something that's really taking place in your absence, but it's based on the information on your credit report. Jays, good evening, John and Dave. I'm a huge fan of both of you. You guys are really clearing up a lot of stuff for me. My personal scores have went up from 500s to mid-6s last month. And he says, using the methods you guys provided. Love hearing that.
So let's just be clear. I haven't provided anybody any systems. If you're using Credit Versio, then that's David's. So please give him.
No, he used methods.
Oh, okay.
So I think we're talking. Here we go. That's the language. Methods. We're talking about credit education, which is such an important part.
So fair enough.
In improving your credit. Monswell, Mike. Here comes Mike. Can we all talk about how you and John missed me? Yes, Mike. We did miss you last week.
I didn't really know that he wasn't here last week.
I wasn't here last week either. I think that's what he's talking about. I had something. I was in an appointment last week, and I couldn't do the live. Let's see, Mike. Are these credit card companies paid by Vantage to use their scoring models?
Yeah, good question. So VantageScore is actually a wholly owned subsidiary of the credit bureaus. So the credit bureaus own the VantageScore scoring models, and it's a joint venture across the three bureaus. So the way that pricing generally works for a credit score, whether it's FICO or VantageScore, is if you think about an invoice that you get from, say, a grocery store, if you went grocery shopping for the week, you may see like 50 things on your grocery list, and every single one of those things has a price. So your milk was $2, your ice cream was $5, your steaks were $30, whatever. Your beer was $25, whatever. So you see on a line item how much all the stuff was that you bought and what you bought. So an invoice that comes from a credit bureau is a little bit like that. So you will see a list of the credit reports that you purchased for the prior month, and then the price for all those. And the price is either going to include a credit score thrown in, so it's actually kind of bundled in with the price you're paying for a credit report, or it's going to be listed out as an option that you're paying an extra cost. So let's say hypothetically that John's bank is paying $3 for a credit report and 75 cents for a score. So you'll see $3 for the report, 75 cents for the score for the credit report and score combo that was purchased for David, who applied for credit with John's bank. So that's generally how invoicing and pricing works for a credit score. The credit bureaus do not pay companies to use their products and services. It doesn't really work that way. It's funny. It's actually kind of an oddball pricing model. The credit bureaus also don't pay any of these companies who provide information to them. So there's like 14,000 companies that furnish information to the credit bureaus on a monthly basis. The credit bureaus don't pay any of them for that data. It's the weirdest economics model I've ever heard of. You have you have no cost for there's no fee for your goods, meaning that there's no like if you build a car, you have to buy glass, you have to pay someone to assemble it, you have to pay for the tires, you have to pay for the metal, you have to pay for all these things from someone to assemble a car. But that's not the way it works with credit reports. They're not buying your data from Cap One and Citibank and American Express and Navy Federal Credit Union. Those companies are willingly giving it to them voluntarily at no cost and then turning around and buying it back from them in the form of a credit report. So it's kind of a bizarro pricing model.
Yeah. Florence with a question. Do the three credit bureaus get their information from Lex Nexus?
They do get some information from Lex Nexus. So Lex Nexus is a consumer reporting agency, so they're a CRA. So they're not a credit reporting agency because they don't house credit report information that you would traditionally see on a credit report, but they absolutely are a consumer reporting agency, and they do fall under the purview of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and you could get a copy of your report that LexisNexis maintains on you. I can tell you they're usually hundreds of pages long and a lot of repetitive stuff, but yes, they're a CRA. The credit bureaus use LexisNexis as a public records vendor. So the information about your bankruptcy and when judgments and tax liens used to be on consumer credit reports, they're not any longer. But when they were on credit reports, they would get that information from LexisNexis. And so yes, some of the information does come through partnerships with LexisNexis.
Excellent. Jamie's got a question. Is the TU early exclusion for negative information asking for removal if within 6 months of falling off legit or a golden unicorn? I haven't seen that one in a while.
I actually don't know what that is. I've never heard of the TU early exclusion, but I can tell you that I'm not aware of any product or service that Transunion offers or that someone says they offer where they're willing to delete information after 6 months or, essentially six and a half years earlier than they're required to.
I don't know what the mechanics are of that, but the last time I saw that question was probably maybe a year or two ago, and it struck me as sort of along the lines of like a goodwill, like, hey, I'm coming down to the very end of it. Can you remove it? I don't know if it's effective or not. I don't have anything more than that, but that's the first time I've seen that. So, Jamie, that's a great question. I'm afraid neither one of us have an answer for you.
Well, I just searched for the term, and there's nothing regarding the TransUnion early exclusion on any of the TransUnion websites. So
okay,
I don't know. It doesn't sound like, again, maybe I just missed it for the past 31 years and it's been flying under my radar.
It could be urban myth. Who knows? It's not like this is an industry that doesn't have its share. Okay, yep. Joseph Weber with a pretty big question here. I took out a brand new home equity loan. I have a good amount of cash out left to use after debt consolidation. Will my FICO scores go up, paying some of that money back on the loan right away in the first month? Showing credit utilization on the account from 100% to say 89% or even 79% are the percentage tiers to shoot for to gain back the most FICO points.
So can I ask, am I allowed to ask Joseph a question if he's still with us?
Yeah, this is all interactive right here.
Yeah, so Joseph, can you clarify if you have a home equity loan, which is what is in your question, or if you have a home equity line of credit and you've just tapped 100% of it for your debt consolidation? And the reason I'm asking for a clarification is because my answer is going to vary based on whether it really is a maxed out home equity loan versus if it's a maxed out home equity line of credit, because they kind of sound the same, and a lot of people use the two interchangeably as if they're the same thing, but they're definitely not the same thing. Okay, so it's a loan. So a home equity loan is an installment loan, and a home equity line is a revolving line of credit. So one of the questions that we had earlier was, are there two types of credit? We talked about installment, revolving, and open. So the good, I guess I have good news and I guess I have bad news. So the good news is that installment debt is almost entirely meaningless to your credit scores. So the metrics that consider utilization ratios, like what ratio of your limit are you using in the form of a balance, the ones that are really important are the ones that consider credit card utilization. Even if it was a home equity line of credit, that doesn't factor into the utilization ratio, even though it's a revolving account. Credit scoring systems are smart enough to tell the difference between a home equity line of credit versus a credit card, even though they kind of look the same on a credit report, except for the Metro 2 context that one is a credit card versus a HELOC. A home equity loan is not considered in those utilization ratios, and so you can certainly pay back the money and lower your balance, but I would not expect that to yield any fantastic increase in your score because the installment debt really didn't do much to it in the first place. I tell a story repeatedly, a personal story about how I paid off a $250,000 mortgage loan when I sold a house, and my scores changed 4 points. And I don't even know if they changed 4 points because the installment debt went away. They may have changed 4 points because of something that had nothing to do with it. So, if I would almost suggest if you have credit card debt that you use the outstanding cash to pay off the credit card debt, that almost certainly will yield a higher score. But if you don't have credit card debt, then obviously you don't have that as an issue. So if you have any other loans outstanding, you might want to just look at the interest rates and choose the ones that have the higher interest rates and then pay those off, and then you're kind of golden and good to go.
Excellent. And Big Gritter 210, love Credit Versio guys. 10 of my friends have signed up already. That is great. I hope they're joining us on our weekly credit coaching there, Big Gritter. Jay, is Vantage going to stop considering medical debt in your credit score as rumored? If so, when? Oh, that's another good one.
Yep. So the rumor is correct. VantageScore is going to, they're currently retrofitting their Gen 3 and Gen 4, so VantageScore 3 and VantageScore 4. They are currently in the process of retrofitting those two generations of scoring systems, and sometime in October, anyway, that's the target, sometime in October, VantageScore 3 and VantageScore 4 will not consider medical collections. I want to make sure that's clear. The question was about medical debt, and so I'm assuming you meant medical debt that's on your credit report in the form of a collection account.
Yeah.
But yes, to the extent that is a medical collection, whether it's paid or unpaid, in Gen 3 and Gen 4 VantageScore in October, even though it's still cosmetically on the credit report, it will not be considered in those versions of VantageScore any longer.
Is there a dollar amount to that for consideration, or
doesn't matter?
Not at all.
Doesn't matter. What the consideration, the trigger is whether or not it's medical, and that's a binary. That's a binary question. Is the collection on my credit report a medical collection, or is it one of the other types of collections? And there's actually in the Metro 2 credit reporting language, actually in the Metro 2 credit reporting standards, debt collectors are required to include a code that indicates that something is medical related when they're furnishing it to the credit reporting agencies. And this gives the credit reporting agencies and credit scoring systems the ability to understand what that is in the process of either furnishing, or in the process of scoring or displaying it on a credit report to a lender or to a consumer who may be getting a copy of their own credit reports. And so that's really the trigger point. So if the code indicating that it's medical exists, That's it. There are no other questions about that collection. Doesn't matter how old it is. Doesn't matter who the original creditor is. Doesn't matter who the collection agency is. Doesn't matter the balance. The fact that it's medical is really the issue. I got to tell you, there are a lot of companies out there that collect medical debts, right? And I don't know how happy they are about all of this, right? It's almost like the momentum really is against them. But they can still try to collect the debt. The thing that worries me, David, is kind of the same thing that worried me back in 2017 with respect to tax liens and judgments. You had people get so excited. So many articles are written about how your credit scores are going to go up because the tax liens aren't going to be on credit reports any longer, and judgments aren't going to be on credit reports any longer, as if somehow that solves the problem of having a tax lien or solves the problem of having an outstanding judgment. And it doesn't. Right. You still have a tax lien. You still have a judgment. And it just may not be showing up on your credit report, but it certainly doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And the problems that come with it still exist as well. So what I hope doesn't happen is that all of a sudden people like Jay, they start to understand this issue of VantageScore 3 and 4, basically saying we don't care if it's medical, we as long as it's medical, we don't care anything else about it. We're going to ignore it. I hope people don't look at that and say, oh well, I guess I don't have to worry about these medical collections any longer. VantageScore is not FICO. FICO has not made any sort of announcements with respect to what they're going to do with their scoring systems vis-a-vis medical debt. So that's number one. Number two is if you have a medical collection on a credit report that's unpaid, you still have a medical collection on your credit report that's unpaid, meaning that the debt collector can still try to call you. They can still send you letters. Lenders can still see them on a credit report and still count them in their own policy, their underwriting policies. Yeah. And guess what? The debt collector can still sue you. So I get it. This is an exciting thing for consumers. That's great. I'm very happy that consumers are happy about this. But let's not pretend like that eraser has erased this collection from existence and now you don't have to deal with it any longer.
You know, John, I've been thinking about this a little bit lately, putting myself in a position of a collection company where, let's say a good chunk of my portfolio is medical debt. And now I have that leverage taken away from me, that, okay, while it's on the credit report, it's there cosmetically. For those who are a little bit more savvy with credit scoring, they're going to understand it's not a big impact. Well, what's the big stick now? What do I have to do to offset maybe that loss? Am I going to have to sue more?
Keep talking. Keep talking, because you're headed in the right direction.
Well, and that's what I think might happen is either maybe I have to take more aggressive steps to be taken seriously.
That's right.
So I don't know.
You replace one stick that's been taken away with another stick, and
one that's potentially more catastrophic to the person who has medical debt.
That's right. So
if I can't motivate you by hurting your credit scores, then maybe I'll motivate you by levying your bank account or garnishing your wages.
Or maybe I'll incent you to pay me back. Maybe I'll just say the hell with it. We're not going to credit report any longer. We're going to sue them all. So you got to peel back the onion on this stuff, right? It's not when tax. I'll give you a great example. When tax liens and judgments were removed from consumer credit reports. Oh my God, the greatest thing ever! Woo! And then boom, within like a month, Lex Nexus created a brand new product called RiskView, which is essentially a report that includes tax liens and judgments, and they started selling it to the mortgage reporting companies. So all you did was replace one feed of the information with another feed of the information. But the credit bureaus got a lot of credit for doing it, which is fantastic. I get it, but
it's good PR.
So it is good PR. But I guess my point, and by the way, there are debt collectors that's all they do is collect medical debts. Yeah. So ARS, HRR, Healthcare Revenue Receivables Group, HRRG, that's all they do is collect medical. they don't collect apartment leases. They don't collect defaulted credit cards. They only collect medical. So
Yeah.
they're not going to just close up shop and go out of business. They're going to try to figure out what to replace the stick with, and they're going to replace it with another stick. And that other stick, unfortunately, may be a whole slew of collection attorneys.
Right. In fact, it's I just now thought of this. One of my good friends here in Las Vegas is an attorney that works for a collection company that has a very large medical portfolio. Actually, I see him and his girlfriend next week. I got to ask him if to weigh in, if there's anything to weigh in on. All right, so John, you really went out of focus. Oh, here it comes. Let's see.
Yeah, sometimes if I move around my camera.
All right. It's like that movie, like what was that Woody Allen movie where the guy, he was just always out of focus? Remember that? I forgot the name of it. Okay, let's see. Big Gritter 210 with a question. Can you guys explain why my Vantage score might go up 50 points, but my FICO score will only go up 20 points?
Yeah, so
I wonder, John, if you put your hand like in front of the lens, if it'll kind of figure out. There we go.
There we go. Wow, look how smart you are.
That was a great guess.
David is my technical support department.
That's my one technical little thing for the whole year right there.
Yeah, so there's no guarantee that your credit scores are going to move essentially in lockstep. Even it's certainly not across credit score brands, and even within the same brand. And so if your FICO 10 score from Equifax goes up 10 points, it doesn't mean that your FICO 10 score from the other two credit bureaus are going to go up 10 points. It doesn't really work that way. The one thing that should happen is that the change in score should be directionally similar. So if one score goes up a lot, the other score should also go up, maybe not to the same extent, maybe more, but there's no guarantee that it's going to go up the same. I can tell you from, and I don't have any sort of score distributions to compare score distributions of VantageScore versus FICO, which, I mean, there's so many of these models that it'd be hard to do an apples to apples comparison. But I can tell you that from personal use, that my Vantage scores are always about 30 to 40 points lower than my FICO scores. Always. Yeah. And that's fine, because it is what it is. It's a different scoring platform. They don't have the same 35, 30, 15, 10, 10 pie chart that FICO does. They consider things differently. They have a different minimum scoring criteria. Clearly, as Jay pointed out with his question a few minutes ago, they are going to start treating medical debts differently than all of FICO's credit scores. So there's really no guarantee that the scores are ever going to be the same. So I wouldn't get so wrapped up with the score changes being inconsistent. That's to be expected, but you would like to see them at least going directionally the same way as they do change. If you ever came on this Facebook Live one week and said my FICO score went up 50 points at Equifax and my Vantage score went down 50 points at Equifax, that would be a problem, because then the models are basically interpreting the changes in your credit reports exactly differently. One thinks that you're a better credit risk because of the change. One thinks that you're a higher credit risk because of the change, and one scoring model is rewarding you, the other scoring model is penalizing you. That's generally not something you're going to see unless you're cross-comparing different credit reports that have different data. But to the extent that they're both going up, then that's actually fine and to be expected.
All right, John, it looks like we got our last two questions here. Jamie again, if I pay off a collection account that's been recently deleted from my credit reports, can they then reinsert as a paid collection, or should I just leave it alone now that it has been removed, trying to do the right thing to pay off old debts?
So number one, I'm gonna answer your question in reverse. So thank you for paying. Thank you for paying.
Good job paying off debt. Yeah.
Thank you for paying that. I defy anybody who's watching this to find any podcast or article that I've ever where I say you shouldn't pay your debt, because you didn't hear it from me ever. So thank you for paying the debt that you owe. Okay. I'm going to give you a bunch of different advice, and you get to pick and choose like a buffet which one you want to listen to. So, David, if you want to throw that back up there, I want to make a point about something. you use the word reinsert. In credit reporting nomenclature, the word reinsert or reinsertion has a very specific meaning. In credit reporting, a reinsertion is a term or a practice that is defined in the Fair Credit Reporting Act. A reinsertion occurs when a consumer files a dispute with a credit bureau. The credit bureau performs a reinvestigation. That's what they're called when a credit bureau does it. It's called a reinvestigation. I don't know why they don't just call it an investigation, but they call it a reinvestigation. So a credit bureau performs a reinvestigation, and the results of the reinvestigation mean that the item is removed. If after that happens, the debt collector refurnishes the item and causes it to be reinserted into the credit report, meaning it's sent back in by the same furnisher and it's the exact same account. It's not a different furnisher. It's not a different account. It's the same exact thing reinserted by the same furnisher. That's called reinsertion, and that is a term, a defined term in the Fair Credit Reporting Act. If that occurs, the credit reporting agency is obligated within 5 days to send you a letter letting you know that something has been reinserted into your credit reports, and so you can, deal with it accordingly. So I just want to make sure that we get the definition of that we get that definition out there, because you use the term reinsert, insinuating that it was there, it was gone, and you're worried about it going back. If the item is accurate and it is less than 7 years old, even if it has been removed, it can be reinserted legally as long as it's not 7 years old. Meaning that if you pay it or leave it unpaid or settle it, then the debt collector can certainly stick it back on your credit report as long as it meets the criteria of something that's allowed to be furnished to a credit bureau. I'm just telling you that they're allowed to do that whether you pay it, don't pay it, settle it, dispute it, whatever, that they're allowed to do it. Will they do it? And if you pay them, I can't imagine a debt collectors that get bombarded, literally buried with frivolous disputes from consumers and have to pay 30 cents every single time they respond to one. That's the e-Oscar fee they pay. I can't imagine one is going to say, you know what, let's stick it to this guy who actually paid us. Let's report it back to his credit bureaus. I can't imagine that's going to happen, but of course I can't guarantee that it will or that it won't. So I'm just kind of throwing out as much information as I can so that you can make an informed decision about your choice.
All right, wrapping up here with Jay. Well, Mike has a comment. The world needs more Jamies. Yeah, listen, if you're talking about settling debt for which you agreed to pay, nothing bad comes from that.
Maybe, Jamie, before you pay it, when you're talking to the debt collector, tell them, hey, if I pay you guys, are y'all going to stick this back on my credit report? And if they say no, then it'd be fantastic if you get that call, and if you record it, first off, because it's going to be he said, she said, if it happens, or get something in writing from them indicating, we will, if you'll pay us or settle this for X amount, we will agree not to report it to the credit reporting agencies. And then if you pay it and then they do reinsert it, I got a list of attorneys about that long that would love to talk to you about breach of contract. And so, but again, I can't imagine they will, but I would, if they're willing to give you something in writing in exchange for you paying them, then that's probably not a bad thing to ask for.
John, what do you think about this last question? So just so for everybody watching, we kind of walk a fine line here because we don't really answer credit repair questions when I'm on with John, because this is more of a credit education live. What do you think about Jay's? Did you see the one I'm talking about here? It's about fifth up.
Yeah, it's the inquiry.
Yeah. Do you want to?
Yeah, throw it up there.
Okay, good.
We can end on inquiry.
Last one. Equifax refuses to remove an inquiry from CBNA, even though I've contacted CBNA and they have no record of it. And yes, it's a disputed medical debt collection charge-off from 2 years ago.
So in CBNA, it's my experience that stands for Citibank North America. So
That's
that
what
could
it
be a
is.
Lowe's card, it could be a Home Depot credit card.
Yeah.
Um, and so you're correlating it, Jay, with a medical debt, which wouldn't
Right.
jive because CBNA is a bank, not a debt collector. So
Yeah.
I don't know what the deal is, but to the extent that it, first off, no furnisher, including none of them, none of the 14,000 furnishers, um, are allowed to cause an item to be on your credit report if they can't validate it. That's one of the standards, right? People think that, oh, if it's wrong, it's got to be removed. That's correct. But if it's unverifiable, then it also has to be removed. The furnisher has to be able to verify the item, which is why the credit bureaus will delete it if the 30 days expires and they don't hear back from the furnisher, because it's now become an unverifiable item, which can be reinserted in the future if the furnisher chooses to eventually verify it. To toggle back to the CBNA issue, if an inquiry, so first off, the credit bureaus are required by law. It's in the Fair Credit Reporting Act. They're required to maintain a list of companies that pulled your credit report. So they can't just not maintain inquiries. And so TransUnion is getting sued for this. I think Equifax is also getting sued for this because some attorneys are trying to argue that inquiries are really the same thing as, say, a mortgage loan or a credit card, that it's subject to a dispute and subject to reinvestigation requirements. While the counter argument is no, it's not, because it's not furnished by anybody. No one furnishes inquiries to the credit bureaus. Inquiries are actually a record-keeping maneuver or action or process that the credit bureaus undertake. They're the ones who post the inquiry to your credit report, not some furnisher or some bank. The banks don't send the inquiries to the credit bureaus. The bureaus just post those, and they're required to maintain them, which is why the only reason they will remove inquiries is if they've been caused by fraud or mixed files or some sort of legitimate reason other than the consumer, doesn't want the inquiry there anymore, or doesn't recognize what the inquiry means. And I see that a lot. Especially with like Synchrony Bank. Well, I don't know what Synchrony Bank is. Well, have you applied for, a credit card with this particular store? Oh yeah, well, that's Synchrony Bank. You just don't recognize them. Comenity Bank is another one. And then Citibank North America, because they issue the Home Depot and the Lowe's credit cards, they're also another one.
Yeah. Okay. So Nicole, we're going to wrap up here in a second, but Nicole, you had a question why there's so many different credit reports with different scores. That's a great question. We actually covered this a little bit in the beginning of this live, but if you really want to get into this, you can go over to creditversio.com in the education section. It's right there on the homepage, and John's got at least one video, one article that explains that in detail. So I would invite you to go over there. It's a very easy explanation, actually. It's probably a 3-minute read, and you'll have it all under your belt there. So Jamie says, thank you. I understand and knew it was a complicated question. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Let's see. Okay. So anyway, for those of you who posted a question on YouTube, unfortunately, when I end the live, I can't see those anymore. Facebook is different. I can see those questions, and I will swing back around and get to them. If you asked a question and we didn't get to it because we got to wrap up here, I can only get John for about 45, 50 minutes. We're going a little bit over. Just submit it to support@creditversio.com, and we will get to it. Thank you so much for joining us today. Good crowd, great questions, and we will see you next Wednesday. John, thanks again for great answers. Really appreciate it.
All right. Y'all have a good night.